Hello, everybody. Welcome to Writers Drinking Whiskey, your literary happy hour, the show where every discarded sofa at the end of the street is turned into a bar and a hoppin' poetry reading. I'm your host and barkeep and guy that will never say, don't sit there, even if you probably shouldn't, William R. Hincy. And joining me today, really special and guest and jazz to do this, is prolific author, poet, naturalist, and lister, Mr. Charles Hood. Hood, welcome to the Whiskey Bar.
Thank you so much. Salute. Cheers to our friends at home.
Salute. So I'll give you the brief intro here, and then you can take it from there because I'm sure I'll miss things. But you've published hundreds of pieces over the years: poetry, fiction, nonfiction. Few notables being you had Mouth, which won the Kenneth Patchen Award for experimental fiction. A Salad Only the Devil Would Eat, The Joys of Ugly Nature, which I have here, and we'll talk about a ton today. I picked this one because I read it many moons ago, and I'm sure I still cannot say it properly. The Zopoliote Cantos.
Chopalote. It's the X is the old medieval Spanish, chopalote, from a Native American word, indigenous word. Yeah, Chopalote Cantos. Wow, no one remembers that book anymore. We're going in the archives now.
See, I like to take it back. I think I read that when I was a student of yours. I think that was one of the books that had come out. And I believe the newest book it's either Salad or was it Nocturne? I'm going to butcher this name too.
Yeah, Nocturnalia. It came out in November. So we're filming this in February of 2024. Hello out there in calendar land. So yeah, I've had three books technically come out in the last 3 months. So I did a little limited edition poetry book, if we'll count that as one. I have a hiking book that came out just this month, California's Best Nature Trails. And then Nocturnalia is Nature in the Western Night, I believe is the subtitle on that. That's from Heyday Books. So it's literally nature at night in all different aspects. Yeah, and then before that, Salad Only the Devil Would Eat. Before that, I don't remember. Yeah, we're at book 20. The hiking book that just came out is book 20 counting from my first book in 1990.
Very good. So I think that leads us to the most important question of the night. What are we drinking?
Well, I've just come off of a different event, and so I'm actually having my classic evening cocktail. This is literally just a Jack and Coke with a little bit of lime, fresh lime juice, and I'm a happy boy. It's very sugary, very simple. Nothing to be, nothing pretentious about it. But are we going to talk about bars? Because I have mine too.
So that is actually the next question. I actually, in the little show agenda I make for every show, I just call it an icebreaker. Right. But really, it's just me wanting to know. And I somewhat know, but I'd like to know your opinion. So where in the world are you?
Yes.
Because I know, but for the audience.
Right, for the audience. Right. So.
And where do you get a drink there?
Right. You won't like my answer, but first of all, for your audience's sake, we're coming to you live in stormy February of 2024, and I live in the Antelope Valley, which is the far edge of Los Angeles County. So if this is the ocean, and then Los Angeles, and there's the mountains you always see at the Rose Bowl Parade in the winter. Behind the mountains, the county continues on, and that's high desert, but not the cool hipster high desert, which is a little bit further south down by Palm Springs. That would be the Joshua Tree, Yucca Valley kind of area where home values have shot up and all the artists live and all the really trendy hipsters go, and where Graham Parsons died, and where they have the rock concerts sort of on the way to Coachella. No. There's another high desert, equally high, equally desertous, but where they perceive as the scum bucket of Los Angeles, where all the dead bodies come to die and the sofas at the end of the roads, and where the Flat Earth Society was housed, and the KKK has an established branch office, and supposedly it's got a much worse reputation than really it deserves. It's just a simple bedroom community like any other. Only you can afford a house here on a teacher's salary, which is something you couldn't do in Los Angeles. But the reputation is such that whenever I give a poetry reading in Los Angeles, I have to kind of like make a joke out of it. Like, yes, I've come in from the Antelope Valley. Anyone need any crystal meth? I'll get it for you wholesale. Yuck, yuck, ha, 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 kind of thing. Yeah. And because I wrote a book called Ugly Nature, I've learned to appreciate, actually, it sounds silly, but there really are cool places in the Antelope Valley. They're just not Yosemite. And in a way, that's good, right? Yosemite doesn't need us. Yosemite has 3 to 4 million people a year going there. They don't need any more, and we don't need to be there either. We can go find some nature around us. So the Antelope Valley has more potential than people might perceive. But as far as now, watering holes, drinking establishments, you have to go to the chains when you're out here. There really aren't any like cool, funky, like really high-end bars that I'm going to talk about. You end up at Yard House, and that's fine. You know, actually Yard House, I like classic rock and roll. I like seeing ice hockey on the TV screen, you know, and just ice. There's nothing wrong with a chain at times. But I'm going to recommend a bar for your readers, listeners, hearers, audience land people. Odium, capital O, T as in Tom, I-U-M. And it's an upscale restaurant and bar in Los Angeles, right by the Broad Museum, by the Walt Disney Concert Hall, across from MoCA, Museum of Contemporary Art. So we're talking Grand Avenue and Temple, roughly speaking, very approximately Third and Temple, 3rd and Grand. So Odium is super foodie, super nerdy foodie, expensive. And you don't go there for good service. You don't go there for good value. You go there for exquisite cocktails. Like, how did you get all these flavors to mix together in this one $15 glass, $20 glass, and taste so amazing? And then you have a couple of those, and you don't mind that the lunch is going to come to $150 for 2 people, or $200, whatever it's going to come to. And then another one of your guests did mention a bar in Reno. It's quite lovely, Death and Taxes. And they have interesting, again, I like when they can do this and this. Oh, I never thought of putting those two things together, but it tastes amazing once they are combined. So Death and Taxes, y'all, previously recommended on this show. And then if you're in downtown Los Angeles, you want to be with the pretentious foodies, you go to Odium by Broad Museum.
Oh, so I'll have to remember that one. So, you know, it's funny that the way you described it too, is when I describe where I am in the world, because I moved, I was in Antelope Valley, I was in Palmdale, until me and my wife bought this house about 13 years ago. How old is my son? So 14 years ago, actually. And I always describe it like, okay, you don't know the area. You know those mountains behind the Rose Bowl or the Rose Parade? You just follow those 15 minutes east and you're at my house. I'm in Glendora. You live in the 57, the 210 collide.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that's a perfect description. So I'll have to try Odium. I have to make a Reno trip. It was Michael Branch was the guest. I'll have to go on and have him treat me to a drink, as you promised, Mike. That's good. So thank you for that.
I'm a sometimes participant in the Glendora Historical Society meetings, because they talk about railroad stations and other obscure tangential things that cross into my interest field. So yes, I know where Glendora is, as a matter of fact. Yes. And,
we're about to have a railway station again at some point in the future, and whenever it's built.
Is that the Gold Line? What they used to call the Gold Line, is that coming out to you now, or isn't it there already?
So they've been building it. It is the Gold Line. It's not. The train station actually is just about built. I drive by it every day taking my son to school, but it's just about built, but it's not functional yet. But I think right now it's all funded, and it's supposed to start Glendora, San Dimas. I know it's funded, I think, to Claremont, if I remember right. And I think they're hoping to take it a tad further. But yeah, that's the Gold Line. It's going to be really close to where the old one was. So.
And for your audience, your listening audience who don't know, LA has good transit, and we're getting to have good transit. So their goal was by 2028, when the Olympics come, to have everything built out. So they're putting in these above and below ground, trains, these, those so-called tube, like if we were in London or the metro in Paris or something. And you can actually get around, a pretty big piece of Los Angeles now. Not all the way you can't go all the way to the airport easily, but that's coming, as they, And the different fingers of the trains are going, extending out. And then there's a more suburban train line, like you'd expect, going Boston to Washington, D.C., the Metrolink. So you can go from the Antelope Valley on down into Los Angeles Union Station that way, and then pick up we call it the Gold Line. They're renumbering everything, but I could go to, Pasadena from my house with a little jog through there. So yay, transportation is coming.
Yeah, I know. It's not so bad. Actually, that's part of what I wanted to get into with you, because when I was reading, I'm just going to call it Salad because it's a long title and I can't speak well. But when I was reading Salad, one of the things I really appreciated about it and loved was getting that historical insight on Los Angeles. Because you were in the Antelope Valley now, but you grew up basically Hollywood, right?
I went to church at First Hollywood Presbyterian. I actually grew up by the LA River in what's now called Atwater, and Elysian Park, and then with my bike, I had friends in Glassell Park and Echo Park, and my mom taught in Echo Park. So I got around a little bit, into Baja Glendale a little bit, Eagle Rock a little bit. I grew up in the generation where as long as you were home for dinner, and as long as you didn't get arrested, everything was fine, So once I got a bike, where I lived was really a pretty big radius, but officially
Sure.
We were in Atwater off the LA River, like between Fletcher Drive and Los Feliz, in that little section there, Glendale Boulevard. Too bad my parents were renting, those sad fools. Otherwise, my life would be very different, right? They didn't buy their house in Atwater when my dad was a delivery driver. Regular people could buy a house there. We were renting. Like, why, Mom? Why, Dad? Didn't you know? I would have so much equity right now.
Right. Yeah, no, I know that's too bad. That's one of the missed opportunities. That's why we always tell people, they'll be like, oh, should we rent? I'm like, if you can buy, just do it. Because if you keep that for 10 years, 20 years, the kids, like it's, it only goes up. So, cool. So ugly nature. I love the term. So maybe you could describe what you mean by that and what it's meant to you.
One of the things about as the city expands out, it doesn't develop consistently urbanized, and then straight unurbanized. Instead, it's more intermingled with formerly planted, now derelict fields and so on. So the Antelope Valley has been, of course, inhabited for 10,000 years by the Native Americans. But in terms of when the Anglo-Europeans came, in the late 19th century, there was more water. There was reasons to be here. There were antelope, among other things. But they had crops, or they had houses, or they had infrastructure that has since then abandoned. The water table dropped, the crops failed. They were grazing cattle and they ate everything and then they left. So there are all these areas in between the housing developments and between the malls and the freeway that were either never developed or they are reverting back to their somewhat secondary growth, pristine desertiness. Sagebrush is growing in, joshua trees are growing in. And I had this idea of a essay or a book or something where I was going to recreate a story by John Cheever, Cheever, Ever, Cheever. And he has a story, The Swimmer, in which the main, it was made into a movie with Burt Lancaster, in which the main character is going to swim home from the country club to his house through the swimming pools of all his rich friends, because it's a Connecticut kind of, right? And it's called The Swimmer. Only it's a really cool thing because we realize he's going through time as he goes pool. He does do the journey, but he starts in sunshine, robust and in good health, and he ends up cold and shivering and broken down after a storm, and he's locked out of his own house because he's actually bankrupt. So we don't know, was he bankrupt the whole time and he's deluded, or is it actually like a time change, shape-shifting kind of thing? But the swimmer, he's going to swim home, and he names the river after his wife. The Lucinda River was going to be, and it's really hilarious because he stops at his mistress's house. One of the pools is named after his wife, and one of the pools is his mistress. And only by then the time is starting to change, and like she doesn't even want him there anymore. And he has a really humiliating thing trying to get through a public pool towards the end, which is supposed to be his bankruptcy. We realized later it was made into a movie. It's called The Swimmer. So I had this idea. I worked at the time at Antelope Valley College, roughly 15 or 20 miles from my house. So sort of a day's walk if you're in good shape, which I'm not necessarily in good shape, but a day's walk. And I had the idea, it would be a great essay to walk home in open land along the railroad tracks, along the ditches, around the undeveloped fields, skirting, there's various storm drains. And I looked at the map, but I pretty much could maybe go diagonal at a crosswalk, or you'd have to go around a school, but pretty much you could go the whole 20 miles back to my house in nature, quote unquote, right? Without having to actually be on a city street much or ever. And maybe, some of that would just be trespassing on the railroad tracks, but that's fine. It was a big right away. I wasn't going to get hit by a train. Only my brilliant idea, COVID, suddenly, just when I'm going to get going on this and for this whole book, COVID comes and I don't go to work anymore. I'm at home Zooming my students, right? I'm actually banned from going to the college initially. Everything's locked down. Luckily, I actually saw the shutdown coming like the Friday before, and actually ran to campus and got all my books and some toilet paper and all the things you're going to need, when you're out and about. So I'm at home, and then the joy of ugly nature is me doing daily walks with my dog in a radius out from my house. Really the same principle. There are in the East Palmdale where I live, there are vacant lots that I could ride a bike to or walk to, pretty much within 3 blocks in every direction, I could find a vacant lot. And some of those vacant lots actually connect up contiguously. Technically, you could probably walk all the way to Angeles Crest without actually being in nature, without leaving nature if you wanted to be, clever about how you crossed Pear Blossom Highway and Mount Emma Road and so on. So that became this idea of celebrating the forgotten parts of the landscape that do get verbally, I'll be blunt, shit upon by, pristine. Oh, it's not Yosemite, it's not Santa Monica, it's not Monterey. But that doesn't mean just because it's the poor people nature, it's not of value. Sure. And so it's a political statement too, that forgotten lands have value. And really, if it was Monterey, Newport Bay, these kind of places, it would be built up. There wouldn't be all the nature left over if it was actually as scenic and well watered as people want nature to be. There's no nature left in Malibu, right? I mean, along the coast, it's all houses, all houses with gates and very protective, litigious owners. But where I live, you don't go in someone's yard, they're going to set the dogs on you. But I can zigzag around through dirt. Nobody cares what you're doing in a dirt lot in the Antelope Valley. Dumping a sofa, burying a body, going for a hike, all the same activities here. Just do
you might see all of them on the same activity.
Right. Really, there's no reason to be exclusionary here. We can do all on the same activity. So the question is, like, how did the title come around? A salad only the devil would eat. That's a line from the opening essay for those who haven't seen the book. But there's an argument inside the press, Heyday Press, who thought of it first to lift that line out and make that be I was just calling it the essay book, in my notes back and forth. And we finished the essay book. And then that became the winning title under dispute. Who thought of it? Probably a woman named Kaylee thought of it. That seems to be the final, but everyone seems to claim ownership of that. And I've heard multiple stories about what meeting I think I came up with it, but no. I'm told it came up in a meeting before I don't know. So A salad only the devil would eat, and it's 14 essays. But really, it's not about the desert the whole time, as you know, because you've read it or you claim to have read it. That was just more the that was more the marketing excuse, because there's other things in there, of course, about the cochineal worm and John James Audubon and whale watching and all of that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I assume it does. I just said I read it. I mean, you can't grade me anymore. I can say whatever I want, right?
God will judge you.
There's so much he's judging me for. This is low on the totem pole. What I loved about it was partially that line, which I opened the show with because I thought it was pretty hilarious when I read it, and it really because I'll try to describe it to people. What usually gets people to understand where it is I'll say, Afro Man and the NBA player Paul George were in Palmdale. I was like, that's where I'm from. But the line that I loved that I opened the show was that the place where old sofas crawl to the end of dirt roads to die. And it's fairly true, right? You go and there's just stuff out in the desert all the time. But what struck me about it too was that, so I think before that we were in Newport Beach.
Yes.
And then you got the gig at ABC, and that's when you had moved up. And it bears the question: was the Antelope Valley your old sofa? Like it's
isn't it everybody's old sofa? Yes. Yeah. So you use the acronym ABC, Antelope Valley College. So I have a poetry degree. I'm a white guy. The world isn't knocking at my door offering me work. I've got to go where the work is. That's just the reality. And I had a sweet gig. I was at UC Irvine, non-tenured, so I was never going to get like permanent work, but I was getting jobs working in different departments, and I was stringing together full-time appointments by adding up lots of 30% here, 50% here. I had 100% employment, which meant I got medical benefits, and I had a rental house at the beach. You could see the ocean through the bathroom window, a block off the beach in Newport Beach. But the rental house wasn't mine, so I had to, vacate it every summer when the family who owned it. It was family owned. They wanted to be back in the summer, so I had to put everything in storage and move out and find some place to go camping for the summer. So that was a little bit of a problem. And I didn't have my own parking place. It was one of those kind of like a little scrunchy beach house, but I didn't have a parking place. So like on the weekend, I couldn't leave home because I wouldn't come back and be able to park for free. There was some street parking, but there weren't any residential stickers and I had a baby coming kind of unexpectedly, and so with the medical plan only being contingent upon each department not knowing that I'd gotten a gig in another department, it was really kind of an iffy thing. So I was, and I couldn't afford property, I couldn't buy a house. And so that was when I decided I needed to get a job, like one with a pension and one with medical benefits. And I'm not, I'm not ashamed of that. It's just, I literally said, I'll take the first job I'm offered. I'm not going to be a prima donna about this. I applied to a bunch of schools, but it was also true that I knew the Antelope Valley because back in the day, we had a great sewage pond. We had, great sewage ponds out of Avenue D and the 14 freeway. And it was dirt lined ponds, no restriction on access, and the sewage was kind of untreated and floating around. And the birds loved it. Like they could go around the edge of the little, the dirt berms and pick the little turds, and everybody's happy. And there were historically some astoundingly good rare birds that had been found at the Lancaster sewage ponds. And so I had been out there bird watching, and Paiute Ponds on the Edwards Air Force Base was kind of open access. There wasn't really any restrictions about that. And the ranchers tend to be a little more friendly back in the 1980s and 70s and 80s. They didn't shoot you immediately when you pulled up. You could knock on the door. Ma'am, may I go visit your trees over there? I'd like to look for some birds. And like, yes, sonny boy, you go look at them birds. Hey, do you want some pie while you're here, little sonny boy? But now, of course, it's all dope.
Were they also Southern? Is this what
yeah, we're Okies. We're Okies. Yeah, we're Okies in the 80s. Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, the Okies, they were Okies, right? That's how they came to the Antelope Valley. And so, yeah. So anyway, when I came out here, it was, there was only a stop sign on Avenue S. There wasn't even a signal light there. That stop sign. Really? So it was easier to get around and a more relaxed thing. So I knew the Antelope Valley, and when I applied, at the college and interviewed, I had to kind of convince them that I was fitted for the area, because I was coming to that job interview with, if I can just be honest about it, a pretty good resume. I mean, I had a Fulbright already. I had a book coming out. My first book was already coming out. I'd given conference talks. I'd, been a UC Irvine instructor. I'd also taught at UC Riverside, taught at Cal State Long Beach. I taught at 20, community colleges. I taught at University of Papua New Guinea, University of Utah. I had a good resume, and they were like, well, what are you doing here? Well, no, I know where I am. I didn't, I didn't say because no one else will have me. I said, the truth. I know where I am. And I actually, they were sort of skeptical. So I told them at my job interview, as I put in the book, I really did say, I'm going to go to the sewage ponds after I didn't say, would you hurry up? Because they're going to close. Like, can we get out of this? Like, you're kind of cutting into my bird watching. But I came out from Orange County to interview out here on the Antelope Valley, here being the Antelope Valley. And, the night before, I went to the Motel 6 in Mojave, spent the night there. Went bird watching on a Friday morning, had an afternoon interview, had lunch at Marie Callender's, which is now closed. You may not know that, but it's closed in the last few months. So I had lunch at, and as I said in the book, took out my earring, tidied myself up in the parking lot, went to my interview, and then afterwards I went to the Lancaster sewage ponds. And the rest is, and that was on a Friday. They offered me a job the next Monday. Monday morning, they checked my references, and by Monday afternoon, they had offered me the job. And I said I was going to take the first job, and I did. Now, what I didn't know is, once I got involved in this and I got divorced and I had money, and it was hard to extricate myself. Once I got into the community college gig, I got used to the salary, I got used to the benefits. I really had to maintain my salary to maintain my spousal support. And so my idea of being here temporarily and moving on didn't happen. But oh wow, your life is your life. It's what happens. It happens. Whatever you thought you were going to do, you're not going to do that anyway. So might as well just enjoy what you end up doing.
Right. What is a sewage pond exactly?
All of the so if you've ever gone skiing at Mammoth, this is for our Los Angeles friends. You've left the urban area on Highway 14. You've come over the mountains. You're in the desert, and then you keep going up to 395. But at Avenue D, which is also Highway 138, which is to cut over to go to Bakersfield or Tejon or something, Lebec, Gorman, Fort Tejon, Avenue D and Highway 138, all of the sewage literally goes to a treatment plant. Now it's much more, there's insurance and liability, and they treat everything with chemicals and vats. But back in the day, one of the things you did was just let the sewage be an open dirt-lined ponds just to kind of settle out. Then they can kind of scrape the sludge off the bottom. And the rest of the water to this day is put two places, Apollo Park. I don't know if you've ever been there. That's sewage water from the Avenue D treatment plant.
Very good.
And I think it's like a 6 or 8 foot sewage. I mean, the entire Antelope Valley is going through these pipes down, roughly paralleling the 14 freeway, or going up. I guess we could say they're going north, so they're going up. And then the other place it goes is out to Paiute Ponds. So that's a historic wetlands that always was there, freshwater wetlands adjacent to Rogers Dry Lake on Edwards Air Force Base. And now it's a little bit hard to get a permit, and they have locked gates, and it's difficult. But back in the day, it was a sort of casual kind of thing. It's a duck hunting location, so you can only go on non-hunting days, or the bird watchers are allowed in. One of the perks of being in the military is you get to go hunting at Paiute Ponds. So all the sewage is being treated now in a sort of chemical process, but still relatively clean water is diverting out then and going to a public park, and then going off to this freshwater wetlands, this marsh called Paiute Ponds.
Oh, okay. Because I used to go to Lake Una, which is considered a sag pond.
Correct.
Right? That's the ground. Yeah. And I remember even back in the day that you could go straight up to the lake. I mean, we'd go at night, and someone would be, fishing there randomly. And then that's last time I went, that was all fenced off.
Right.
In fact, someone had cut a hole in the fence, and I'm not the established birder you are, but I got very into hawks for a while, like raptors, I should say, for a while. And there was a northern harrier that used to hang out there during the winter all the time. And I wanted to go. I mean, usually it was outside the lake, but for some reason, maybe it was flying around there. For some reason I wanted to go in, and there was a hole. So I went in, and then someone showed up, maybe 10 minutes later, like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "There's a bird." And he was like, "Whatever, you're just a nut. That's fine. Go." Get out from the fence and go look at your birds. But
so did you call it the bottomless pond? Are you part of that generation? Lake Una?
Yes. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
Supposedly you can't touch bottom. I mean, of course you can, but that's the bottomless pond is Lake Una. Yeah. So for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, there's a historic highway, goes back 100 years, called Sierra Highway, and it crosses the San Andreas Fault. And that fault, the road crosses at right angles, and the fault line has water coming up naturally. It always has water coming up at the strike zone, as you said, a sag pond. And so one of the ponds became Lake Palmdale with a dam. It was always a pond, but it became Lake Palmdale where they store drinking water and have a hunt club. And then the other side was just kind of a random 1 acre kind of, an oval pond lined with trees, well as primarily some cottonwood trees. Yeah, people just fished or hung out or, drank or did, rode bikes. But the landowner, whoever it is, felt there was a liability issue. And so, they have a chain link up on it, not supposed to come in there anymore. That's probably been there 15 years, I would guess, or more, really. And so
probably more, huh?
But it's visible from this Sierra Highway thing that's crossing the strike. You're crossing the fault without knowing that. And then, you know it because there's the sag pond. And you can see this obvious Lake Una, or the bottomless pond, right from the highway. And so it's attractive to kids. The teenagers,
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, because it's super haunted. You know, I mean, you learn that very early on. That it's a super haunted bottomless pond. And so you fall in there, you never get out until you haunt it.
Right. So. Yes. Right. And I think all towns need to have one of those. That's right.
Yeah, it's mandatory. So, reading the book, one of the things that struck me with with those in between areas, right? The kind of intersection between man-made, versus what's the old term, untrampled wilderness or whatever, the idea that it's not people, changing it as if we're different from nature, somehow we're not natural. But one of the things, reading it, there's a real celebration to it. There's almost like something transcendental or even like spiritual about it. Am I reading too much into it? Would you agree with that? Would you care to elaborate on that, or just completely disagree with me?
So you're using the correct word. Transcendentalism is, a 19th century literary period with Henry David Thoreau and, with Emerson and Bronson Alcott and, sometimes sort of Hawthorne on the periphery of it kind of thing. And these are all people hanging out in Concord, Massachusetts and looking for the sublime in nature. But one of the things that people mistake is they misquote Thoreau. He said, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." It's often misquoted, wilderness is the preservation. But of course, Concord, Massachusetts, which is where Lexington and Concord is nearby the Civil War the Revolutionary War, and in the 1850s, there's a railroad there. There's commerce. Boston, you can get there. So it was a very settled, urbanized kind of space that Thoreau is, writing Walden Pond about, and urbanized to this day. So Walden Pond is now a state park. You can go swimming there, and they have a little replica cabin, but there's a parking lot and a gift shop, and it's a recreational place like anything else. And so people mistakenly think that Thoreau and Emerson were off in the pure wilderness, but Emerson has a house, and he's got servants, he's got a family, he's got a lecture, like he doesn't want to go into wilderness. That's he's a very urbanized kind of person. If you read their journals, there's sort of a contentious friendship between them. I think Thoreau would be on the spectrum, we would say today. And I remember him sort of complaining he had bought a telescope by working as a surveyor. Emerson had more money because he was a very successful lecturer. And Thoreau grousing, like, he keeps borrowing my telescope. He should buy his own, a spyglass to go look at the birds with, kind of thing.
Right.
But even when Thoreau was at Walden Pond for, all of a year and a half, he could hop on the train. The train ran right behind Walden Pond. He could actually hop on the train and go into town a couple miles and hop off and go to Emerson's for dinner and walk home. So, the idea of how wild Concord really was,
Right.
A very progressive town. They let women vote. Now that not on huge things, but they had women could vote for the school board, for example, in 1850s in Concord. This is where Little Women was set, and the house for Little Women is still there. You could tour that. And so when it was the first vote for a school board that women could vote on, all the men in the town agreed to let the women only decide that election. I think that's kind of progressive. It was also a stop on the Underground Railroad. So Thoreau, Emerson was a little bit too, fussy, and he's got a reputation, but Thoreau would take the escaped slaves, enslaved people. Let's use the correct term here. We don't want to dehumanize them further. The enslaved people who were trying to become unenslaved, trying to get up to Canada, Thoreau would be the one that would take them in his wagon to a train station out of town and then buy them their ticket and get to make sure they were safely on their way to Vermont, and then they could cross over to Canada from there. So it's a really interesting intellectual, temperance movement people are there, women's rights are there, Margaret Fuller is there. They're arguing and debating in these public lectures. But the one thing it's really not is very wildernessy. It's been settled for 150 years by that point. So am I transcendental? Yes, and in the sense that then I am also looking for the sublime in the less than sublime places. So I have no complaint about Yosemite. I go there every year, but I also go to Yosemite in the low visitation periods. So for the if you think of like a wave like this, like there's low visit, high visits. I wouldn't go to Yosemite in the summer unless I really had someone with a gun to my head, like how horrible, you got to line up. Yeah. So if you go in like early December, that's kind of the low visit. There's still people around, but you can get hotel rooms are cheaper. You don't need a reservation to get into the park, and the trails are pretty much empty to get out. It's the first quarter mile kind of thing. So I'm fine for Yosemite, but I look for the sublime other kinds of places. So am I celebrating nature? Sure, but maybe not the most conventional or traditional kinds.
Right. Well, and that's part of what I loved about it too, is that so much, even like, maybe it's just a popular misconception of it, but so much of it tends to be there's nature and then there's man, and like, it's like we're separate over here. And I think you had a quote in here. It was one of the quotes, because I did read it. I even pulled out quotes. Like, I'm going to ask you my grade at the end of this, and you're going to have to give me an A, or I'm going to dub over it. But because that's the control I wield, and I'm mad with it. But you had a quote that was, "To leave nature, island in a sea of exalted adjectives, is to leave us out of the conversation." Which I really loved about it, is because I've always felt like it's all we do is natural, because we're a part of nature, and it's really more like we just do it at these wild scales that can like just screw everything up within days or minutes if we're dropping nukes or whatever the case might be. But beavers build a dam. Why is their dam natural and not ours? Like it's more just a matter of scale and impact we can have on it. Why do you think though, like that happens? Like there is that prevalence of, hey, it's man. There's the untrampled wilderness, even though it never was. Like we came, and it was the native people were taking care of the wilderness and doing things, and farming and clearing out brush, whatever they might have been doing, because they realized they were one with the land. Why do you think that prevalence still kind of, maybe I'm wrong to think it infuses nature writing, and I know it's not all of them, because I've had some nature writers on here that would also disagree. But you have any thoughts on
No, you're right. And it is a misapplied romanticism, capital R. So classical romanticism, one person, usually a white male, goes out into the wilderness and sort of, looks at the landscape, the rugged Alps or whatever it has. This is a Caspar David Friedrich kind of painting, looks at the rugged Alps and has the lofty thoughts as the fog swirls around him. But if we think about the marketing and publicity machine behind a nature program, so I'm going to watch BBC, Wildlife Today kind of thing. It's got upbeat music, it's got these sweeping panoramas, and what they're not showing you, if we just turn the camera around, did the making of, like there's all these guys with huge expensive cameras, and that's going to take huge batteries, and then either electricity source or solar panels, and vehicles galore, and then the drone pilot's got to be doing we're only being shown from the camera's perspective out this way, but if we just turn it around, there's got to be a road somewhere. These people didn't just drop in, they didn't parachute in with all their equipment, That's even true in Antarctica when they do the penguin kind of thing, right? There's got to be a base camp somewhere nearby, but that's been erased and part of the marketing kind of idea that yes, wilderness is here and people are here. Whether we can say that goes back to the Bible or all the different sources, it is something that is reinforced by the idea of I'm going to go to nature instead of just say I'm going to be attentive to the nature that's around me. I'm going on vacation to nature. I'm going to go seek nature, or I need to buy my nature journal. How about just using the same cocktail napkin you always use for your ideas? You don't really need a nature journal, but if I say that, then the people that sell nature journals will be mad at me. And, there's a whole nature journaling industry now, a cottage industry of people giving talks about and lesson plans for, and how teachers can teach the nature journal. And I don't know, it seems like teaching, sexual positions. Like, can't we just do it? Just instinct will take you a long way on that, won't it?
It might be fun to figure it out as we go.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it'll evolve as we go. And you're going to tell me the right way to hold your glass is like, oh, I've got to have the pinky out and then a 33-degree angle, and I got to hear the little ice clinking. So yeah, I'm a little more skeptical about this idea. They like to prepare and sort of like what I call high church. Where we have to be dressed special and hushed voices and tiptoe around. Oh, I'm in nature now.
Right. Yeah. It is funny. I think I remember that growing up. That. When you grow, so we moved to Palmdale. We were like right off of Division and Avenue R. For anyone familiar, my folks are still there, so I still frequent out to the area. And there was the first part where it's like, oh, it's just desert, and it says I would go play in it. I was in the desert constantly, but it's just like you start to overlook it. And then once I was there for a period, and then once I started like getting into hawks and things, it's like I started waking up early, like, oh, there's all these animals out. If I get up right around sunrise, like there's going to be all these birds. You might see seeing a red tail like swoop down and grab a bunny and mantle over it, like this is my bunny now, and all these amazing things. And that sometimes like you don't realize it. I think John Lane was on the show. He wrote a book called I'm going to butcher it. I'll put it in the description, called Neighborhood Hawks. Whereas these red-shouldered hawks, and he just watched them for a year. And anytime he heard the hawks, he'd just go watch them for a year. And he wrote a whole book on it and things. And I think there is that, like, once you realize like nature's all around you, you almost want to preserve it more, right? Like there's like, oh, when nature's just out there, it's like, okay, well, that's just the other, But once you realize you're part of it, then it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I do want to keep this. I want to like go see the hawks around me and things. That's joyful and that's interesting. I do have to ask, though, because I think the first essay is called I Heart Nature. So when you give readings or give talks about that, do you do like the hand, what is it, like the hand emoji? Do you say I heart nature, or do you?
No, the lucky thing about giving readings is you only have, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is, depending on the event, right? And then you can do the Q&A, or you're sharing the stage. So I just do the best hits, same as every other writer. I've got the 3 or 4 pages that I've read from before, but I know, I've got my cadence down. I know the audience. So usually the title of the essay doesn't even come up because nobody cares. It's not like they're taking notes. This is not, oh, and when T.S. Eliot went hiking with Ezra Pound, what year was that? Like nobody cares. Like I just say, they're just there to be entertained or learn, get school credit or whatever poor reason they end up in my events. So I'll just read some little passage and then.
There's good reasons. It's not poor reasons. These are great reasons they show up at your events. Yeah.
Well, I always say if they get a signed book, it's worth $1 more on eBay after they, as soon as they come and meet me, and I do the little signature thing. So that's the best reason to come to an event. Enhancing the commoditization of your literature shelf.
Every writer's dream, I hear.
So I got a Glendora thing for you. Do you know what the zone-tailed hawk is? Because you've got one.
I do.
Okay.
We have one.
Well, there's one, obviously, you know where Monrovia is to your, I don't know which way you're facing, to your right or your left, however you're sitting right now, but there is one resident. So we'll fill your audience in, right? So there are lots of hawks in North America, and one of them is primarily in Arizona and deeper into Central America called the zone-tailed hawk. It's all black. It's got stripes on the tail, and it has a really cool thing. It pretends it's a vulture. So if I'm a turkey vulture, I've got a red head, but you can't really see that against the sun or if it's way up. What you see in a turkey vulture is that it's got the wings are at a V and it kind of rocks. It's floating and it rocks side to side. And it's got a kind of a T-shaped, the shape isn't quite the same as the other hawks. So if I'm a little rodent scurrying around, I'm a little Mojave ground squirrel, and then I see this sort of dihedral. Well, I'm alive, so I think the vulture cannot catch a live prey. It's just not, the talents don't work that way. So the zone-tailed hawk looks exactly like a turkey vulture, other than this banding on the tail, except then when the little squirrels are like, oh, it's just another vulture. Shazam! They go to little squirrel heaven. And so they're normally on average, they're in southern Arizona is kind of the closest. If we did the range map from Mexico up into North America, but there is one, maybe two, that are along the foothill slope where you live. So Glendora, Monrovia, above between the 210 and the foothills, and they're they roost stack sometimes even with vultures. They know their camouflage kind, so to speak. And, not nesting, but they came up here after a storm or. They call post-breeding dispersal. They may have just been looking for new territory and then decided that the way the thermals are, along the way the air currents are flowing up on the Glendora slope, going up to Mount Wilson and the high Sierra, the high Angeles Crest country, that they can, do this gliding flight back and forth. And you can see in the Claremont, the records are, whenever they're seen, someone posts a little note. But between the 210 and the hills themselves, and the hills going up.
That's exactly where I am. It's right between the 210, and I'm not the fancy people. They go further up. Everyone's super fancy, but right before the fancy people hit, where the everyman is, that's where I am.
I finally went to Bradbury. I'd always heard of it. I thought I drove through it once. Yeah, right. There's some money. There's some money there. Yeah,
yeah. Right. I didn't even know it existed until my wife works at City of Hope. If you know the area, so And she worked at City of Hope forever, but she's like, oh, some of the doctors can't make it in because there was a fire. And she went, oh yeah, there's a fire by Bradbury. And I was like, what is Bradbury? We've lived here 10 years. I've never heard of Bradbury. And she's like, oh no, it's like above Monrovia. It's this tiny little, it's just like super rich people up there. I'm like, oh, like Sierra Madre is another, like, oh, just go up there. That's the rich people, even by Arcadia rich money. But
I think Bradbury might be the densest, richest part south of Montecito, like even more rich than Beverly Hills per se, I think. And they got horse trails and so on.
Sure.
Yes, I'm a fan of City of Hope. I am a cancer survivor, so yay for City of Hope. We'll give them a plug. And then, so the 605 comes to the 210. You can picture that very clearly, right?
Absolutely.
And there's a wash that comes down there. Do you know there are 2,000 bats under that bridge?
Is there?
All right, so
I have to tell you, because that terrifies me, because there was a portion where I was working and I could ride my bike to work, and you can ride right under
the bike path,
the bridge,
right,
and it goes to the St. Gabriel River is what we call it. That usually has no water, but right there. And I rode to work one day during the winter, and I had meant to leave before it got dark, and then didn't, because I got caught up working and had to ride under that bridge, just pitch black. It was actually really hard to even ride it because I couldn't see where I was going because I was unprepared. But now I'm terrified in retrospect because there's 1,000 bats there that were waiting for me.
No, in winter they're not there, right? So bats are insectivorous here in Los Angeles, right? Good. So they're only there in the summer. And they don't care about you since you're not a mosquito. They really have no interest in Mr. Hincy's. You're several thousand orders of magnitude larger than their prey item kind of idea. So for bridges not to collapse and be brittle, they have to have expansion and contraction joints, and that's for both earthquake and also heating and cooling. That's just how you build a bridge. And some of the grooves in the freeway bridges are exactly the crevice width of a cave slit. Like we think of bats being in a big cave, and they can be, but they also go into like a slit in the cliff face, and then nestle in there. And so the expansion joints under the bridge where the 210 is, the 605 is coming in and the 210 is crossing the thing. And for your reading, you can actually ride a bike all the way down there for your listening audience, all the way to Long Beach, on that path.
Yeah, I've done it.
Yeah. And if you're a bird watcher or a bat watcher, you have to watch out. Some of the bike guys have expensive bikes and they're going fast. They're masculine testosterone aggression. They're going 50 miles an hour on these $8,000 bikes. You can get knocked over pretty badly. Anyway, so a thing called the Mexican free-tailed bat, also called Brazilian free-tailed bat, same thing, lives, and a few other species. They live in these cracks under that bridge. And if you park at the 7-Eleven that's uphill, there's legal to park on the street by the 7-Eleven close to that intersection, and go out at dusk with a flashlight. You're not going to be unprepared like you were anytime between April and October, and go on the bike path where you rode your bike in the dark and just hang out under the bridge with your flashlight. There'll be little toads probably, and there might be a nighthawk or two coming around, but just wait and you'll see the bats pouring on out and swirling around and then dispersing to eat insects in Mexican free-tailed bats. Yeah. And then they feed up as high as 10,000 feet and they can fly 100 miles an hour. And they are eating insects only. That's their, there are other kind of bats that eat nectar, and there's a kind of bat that eats a fish and so on. But ours here in Los Angeles, 14 species of bats in the greater Los Angeles area, 14, 15, somewhere in there. They're always, all of ours are insectivorous. And so they are dispersing to eat the moths and mosquitoes and beetles. One kind is there called the pallid bat, Pallid. It eats scorpions. So it doesn't eat flying insects. It hovers like a marsh hawk. You're talking about the northern harrier, also called a marsh hawk. And, they kind of quarter the field. They kind of hover and rock close to the ground. So pallid bat is doing that, but it's looking for centipedes and large beetles and scorpions. And there's a few pallid bats there in that whole congregation of bats. So you're very close to all this cool activity. The zone-tailed hawks, and they're, I think the zone-tailed hawks are more likely to be around in winter. I think they did go back to their breeding grounds, but then the bats are more likely in summer. And you can bring your 14-year-old if he will be seen with you anymore, like he's reaching that age, right? But
we're still good, but it's coming.
It's coming, yeah, right. So it's a cool thing to do as a family thing. And then if you borrow a UV flashlight, you could look for scorpions in that same wash. You can get off the bike path. It's legal. It's legal. It's allowed to get off the bike path. And if you have a UV flashlight, scorpions glow in the dark like a poster, glow. I mean, all scorpions glow in the dark with a $10 UV flashlight from Amazon. So you can kind of look around the desert scrub around the base of like yuccas and the rocks and watch the bats come out, and then look at the little ground critters there. And there might be a bat it might be a bird called the lesser nighthawk. They come around there in the summer. So, and you'll hear the great horned owls hooting. So there's a lot right there in Glendora. There is a lot happening.
There is. I gotta check it out. My wife will never go for that, but I may be able to get my son out with me. So my wife, I think this is when I realized I had a hawking problem. Was that my older daughters, so Rand and Cassie, that I had actually, 20. So when I was a student of yours, I already had a kid, and probably a second, depending on how the years went. And they went to visit their mom out in Indiana. So mom had moved to Indiana. They fly back to Ontario International Airport, and we picked them up from the airport. It was the first time we'd ever really been apart. And so they were out there for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it happened to be. We're going to get on the airport, and that area for people watching, it's a pretty big area. I mean, there's a lot going on in Ontario. It's not LA exactly, but it's not untrampled wilderness either. And we're getting on the freeway, and because I'm always scanning the post for hawks, I was looking up, there's a golden eagle right off the freeway. And I'm like, oh my God, I've never gotten to see one up close at that point. I'm like, oh my God, there's a golden eagle. And I was like, what? And I'm pulling off. Like, what are you doing? There's a car breaking down. What's happening? I'm like, no, there's a golden eagle. Look. And she looks up and she sees it, like, and I'm like, I have my camera because I took it to take pictures of the kids. So I'm like, oh, I got my camera. I didn't have my telephoto lens, which is one of my great regrets in life, is that I didn't take it that day, but I did have a decent enough lens. I was able to get some pictures. So I'm off the side of the freeway with the kids, three daughters, my son, who was a baby at the point, my wife, just like scowling at me, taking pictures. And then the golden eagle flew off. He went to like the next exit, and I saw where he landed. And I'm like, oh, we're going over here. And I got off and watched him there. And a couple of red tails came down, started mobbing him. I think he got too close to the nest, I'm assuming. But they're mobbing him, and they're doing this, the screech that no one will believe me, but is that the screech that they say eagles make in movies actually is the red tails. Right. You hear that?
Right,
yeah. They're coming down. They're just pissed. And he finally flies off. This whole thing takes like 45 minutes. And like, I just lucky I didn't get divorced at that point. And that's when I was like, okay, I got some great pictures of a golden eagle, by the airport. Now it's time for me to scale back. But now that you tell me about the zone-tailed hawk, which I never really thought I had the chance to, besides traveling to see it, a chance to kind of look at it around here. Now I might have to do some bike rides a little closer to Monrovia.
Bald eagles pass through your slope too. The old assumption was that they didn't like urbanized areas, but as bald eagles recover, or they just have to deal with us in some kind of a way, or both, there are bald eagle records, and there are condor records from the 210, but on the Tujunga side. That is not common, but they are possible, certainly. Right. And of course, historically, there were condors in Glendora. I mean, John Muir was in Pasadena, and he talked about them. We're talking the 1880s.
Right. Yeah, I'll have to pay attention. It is that usually I see a turkey vulture, and it's fine. I'll watch them for a second. Like, whatever, turkey vulture. But now I'm gonna have to pay a little more attention to the tail to see if it's actually a zone-tailed hawk.
Yes, that's right.
Fooling me like the squirrels. So
one year there was
No, go ahead.
One year there was a zone-tailed hawk that was wintering in Santa Barbara off the 101, but north of Goleta, and I used to go pick up my daughter in Paso Robles for my visitation as a divorced dad. And I actually saw the zone-tailed hawk cross in front of my car on the freeway on the 101. So it's on my state list, but also on my car list, animals I've seen from the car. Zone-tailed hawk.
Very good. So actually that worked out very perfectly, because the next thing I thought we really needed to talk about was lists. And I know you refer to yourself as a recovering birder. Yeah, I think I read that somewhere, and I know you're not as avid as you were before. But I think it's time to come clean. This whole interview has actually been an intervention. We care about you. We love you.
Yeah. Right.
We do feel like the list have maybe gotten out of hand. You might just need to put those down. Step away from the list for a minute.
Right. What happened was I got clean of birding, and I'll use that term, appropriately. I got clean, and I was clean and sober for a couple of years. And then I made the mistake of I wonder how many mammals I've seen, because I know I'd seen a bear and an orca and a seal. I just began making a list, and if I just see a few more, I'll be at 300, and then another, I'll be at 400. And so I now, as we speak, am a member of the 1,000 Club. And there's only like 10 people in the world. They're all men. So I'll say there's only 10 guys in the world who have seen 1,000 mammals.
So you saw the Orwal?
The narwhal. No, that's not on my list. Yeah, narwhal. No.
I thought it was in the book that you wanted that to be the.
Yeah, but I couldn't make it happen. Right. It was Crossley's dwarf lemur was 1,000 in Madagascar. A nocturnal lemur in Madagascar was 1,000. No, I have not. The problem with narwhals is it's a very, very expensive trip. You've got to go Baffin Island, basically. And so you're looking at, sort of $5,000 in airfare, and then hiring an Eskimo, and they might shoot the the narwhal you're looking at, because they hunt, they're subsistence hunters. So no, I went to Madagascar, and I knew I'd pass 1,000 because I was in the 990s from other journeys. And so it was inevitable. And I have a little picture of me, blah, blah, blah. And there's holding a sign that says 1,000. But I've managed not to worry about it after this. So I have seen, of course, things since then, but I am not writing them down anymore.
Oh, you got past that list now.
I've let that go. The thing is about the people who are good listers, generally men, generally OCD, generally type A personalities, is whether you write it down or not, So, if I go from my house to my old employment, I'm retired now, but if I go to ABC, Antelope College, I know how many ravens I've seen between home and there. I don't have to count them. I just know. And I know if I've seen, when crows arrived in the Antelope Valley, there's now used to be no crows. Now there's like one crow for every 1,000 ravens or something. I know if I saw any crows today, I remember where I was when I added crow to the campus list. So once a lister, always a lister, because it's a personality defect. It's not something you choose to do. The question is just how do you, where are you controlling the list, or does the list control you? That's the only, right.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I think there was a time in the book where you described it as because you describe pretty in great detail. No one watching this will understand how detailed you are just from what you've been describing thus far. But you just said if you're only looking for like freshwater snails, that's not really a list. It's just a sad obsession.
Yeah, it's got to be competitive. You've got to you've got to have a chance of losing, and you've got to have a chance of having to fight with others to get to the top possible ranking. But I'll give you some, I don't know if who knows what your audience, what your readers, what your listeners want to know, but in California, there are 58 counties, and in the populated areas, Orange County, Los Angeles County, San Diego County, Monterey, there are a lot of bird watchers because there just are. And so they keep lists of how many birds they've seen in their county. So everyone probably has a state list. They have a life list, how many birds in the world, how many birds in North America, how many birds in California, how many birds you've seen this year. But for some of the California birders, their most competitive listing is actually their county. And there is a fellow, Guy McCaskey, who has seen 500 species of birds in San Diego County. And that's just, and in comparison, for those of us who are still in this program after 56 minutes and haven't just said, these guys are losers, why am I watching this? For those of you who are still with us, in comparison, if you were in the British Isles, if you lived in England and you went to Cornwall, Scotland, all the parts of the British Isles, Great Britain, and it's incredibly hard to get 500 in all of Great Britain, including the tippy part of Scotland, the farthest part of Cornwall, every possible, vagrant and there's one guy who's got 500 just in San Diego alone. So we're talking about seriously, now he's had a head start because he's an older gentleman, Guy McCaskey. And so he's got a start on us all because he started in the 50s. But nonetheless, there are those people who are getting, close, and they would know, well, I'm at 496 or I'm at 494. And everyone knows what everyone else has seen, what everybody else hasn't seen. My wife always, claims she has got a list of the mammals that I haven't seen. So it's like 2 mammals on her list that I haven't, she has a list of 2, but it's the 2 I don't have. So well, I appreciate that. So yes, I've stopped at 1,000, but then again, I know what I have seen since then, roughly speaking, and I know what I haven't seen pretty explicitly. The question is, what are you gonna do about it? Live your life, be happy, don't do anything about it.
That's funny. What is it with listing? Is just the community of it? Like, convert me to the listing, because I have to stress this. There is a world out here, and there's a lot of us, Hud. There's a lot of us. No list, never a list.
Right.
I can tell you how much whiskeys I've drank, and I know there's a lot, but I've forgotten some. I'm going to drink them again. It's going to be like the first time, and I'm going to be very happy about that. So convert me to being a lister.
No, you don't want to be converted. There's nothing that you want to be involved in. It's a terrible kind of thing. But what happens is you get a little dopamine hit because you add it to your list, and it's a very legitimate high. And I don't mean this in any kind of disrespectful way or joking way. Oh my God, I drove all night and I got there and I got out of the car and I used not just luck, but really good field craft. And I had my binoculars ready and I had memorized the field marks, and Shazam, there it was. And I got it, and that a friend doesn't have it or he has it. Maybe that adds a little bit of, sweetness or bittersweetness to it. But it's like, oh yes, because once you get on your list, it can't be taken away. With very, 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 very few exceptions. It may be that you realize, oh, it got released from a zoo or something. The zone-tailed hawks are not really kept in captivity. So if you see one on the 210 freeway, you're fine. But Harris hawks are sometimes used by falconers. They're native in Arizona and Mexico. So if I see a Harris hawk in California, it's probably not countable. Or maybe I thought, so there was a snowy owl. Do you remember the snowy owl from last year? It made the LA Times and all the TV news.
I did hear about it, yeah. Yeah, I used to go on to the rare bird alert every day and look at that thing, and I just like, what is it?
So for your audience, again, for your listeners, there was a untethered, like it didn't have what they call jesses, didn't have any straps from being a falconer's bird, didn't have any bands. Like when an animal is in a zoo, it gets banded, like the flamingos should have bands on them. An unbanded, unjessed first year snowy owl was in Orange County in the winter of 2023, winter 2022, 2023. on chimneys in this one neighborhood, not too far from the ocean, and presumably was hunting ducks and coots and things in marshlands and golf courses and parks at night, and then hanging out on the tops of buildings. Thousands of people went to see it. I went down to see it. It's a very beautiful animal, and all the neighbors were sort of tolerant of it. If you're looking forward at which street is it on today, like the neighbors out for their little morning walk would say, "Oh, Sonny boy, it's over there." And so. Right. The question is, where did it come from? And it could easily have flown down from Alaska because they do that, but it probably flew onto a grain ship like in Seattle that had rats on it. Followed just stayed on the ship as it went down, and then it came into the port of Long Beach or the port of Los Angeles, and then it flew into then the ship's gone and it's eaten all the rats, and so it flew into the closest neighborhood. So. There's a debate among some people, not me. Well, can I count it? Because the official governing body of ornithology says origin unknown. Therefore, we're not adding it as a legitimate thing because it may have been assisted by this ship or in some way could have cut. Because of Hedwig the owl and Harry Potter, there's a little bit of an underground trade in snowy owls. That some rich kids owl got out of his bedroom. We don't know where it came from. It doesn't count. Oh, you're deflated. Like, oh my God. Now, of course, your list is your list. You can count all the owls you want. You can count every animal at the zoo if you want. Who cares? It's your list. But but with that exception of like, oh, I thought it was a good owl, and then the committee voted it down. I have to take it off my list. That's one time in a million. The rest of the time, every time you see something, you've always seen that now, and it's on your list, and it's good, and you saw it, and you had a great moment seeing it, and you had to drive all night, and then you had the field guide out, and it's like winning. Like, why do the people care about the Super Bowl? But they sure do, right? Even the fans feel like if their team wins, they won. Only this is better because I'm the quarterback. If I won, I won. The guy next to me can win. It doesn't help. I've got to do it myself, and I get all the pride and ownership from that. And and you don't want to brag about it, of course, but everyone knows. Oh yeah, or better yet, you found the snowy owl. Not that you saw the snowy owl, but you found it first, and like, oh yes, well that. Yeah, I did see that owl.
I'm the first to see that snowy owl.
I like how you say you don't want to brag about it, but you do want to write an essay, put it into a book, and release that.
Well, I put a picture of the owl into the Nocturnalia book, Nature at Night. Yeah, about urban. There's a chapter about urban nature, and so I have a great picture. I had a really expensive lens. I got a great picture, so I was kind of looking for an excuse to like, oh, how are we filling up the urban chapter? I know we'll put that owl in there. Everyone likes that owl.
I do wonder because the other part of the book you mentioned dioramas. So if you were to build a diorama of your life and about your work, what would that look like?
Oh, I definitely would want to have that blend, what I call blended ecology. So there is a diorama at the Natural History Museum. It's very surprising. I asked once, how did you guys even get that past the board of trustees? So it's a coyote and it's got a cat in its mouth and there's a parrot up in the tree. It's a little tiny diorama. They like filled in a little damaged piece of the display or something, but there is a recently done diorama, and that's what I would want is somehow like beer cans and plastic bags and a coyote. And a zone-tailed hawk, or whatever, or a golden eagle. Sure. Right? There are golden eagles in Los Angeles, as you experienced. I've seen golden eagle from the 14 freeway going by. I was driving towards the mall. I also saw, people keep lists of the birds they've seen from their yards, your yard list, and I have 76 on the house I'm in now. But I had a better house before a divorce, and that had a better list. I had a house up at 25th and S, but up on a hill. A view house, and I was coming home. I saw a golden eagle. I ran every red light because I wanted to get home and get my telescope out so I could look back the way I come because the eagle was going like, I don't want to pass my house and keep going. So I was driving like so insane, to get that on my house. Check golden eagle on my house list. Yeah, so people don't appreciate that there is all this beauty and gorgeous. There are rare whales. There are rare seals. Guadalupe fur seals shows up in Los Angeles County. So I'll give you give our viewers out there in TV land a number: 685. That's the official California bird list as we speak today. That includes parrots that have been released from their cages accidentally and become a breeding population, as well as albatrosses and golden eagles and bald eagles and all the other things that have turned to zone-tailed hawks. So 685 species in California. And that tells me that in any given moment, I have a pretty good chance of seeing something interesting if I'm just being a little bit alert, whether it's a bobcat or, or whether it's a coyote or a possum or whatever it's going to be. And so it really is true that this stuff is all around us, and that just because Los Angeles is a big city doesn't mean it doesn't have all kinds of things happening within it. And that's true about art and about whiskey and about cars, but also true that about nature as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I remember one time I came home after I left the ABC. I was going to Cal State Bakersfield. There was the little, maybe it's still there, the satellite campus that you could go to. When I moved out here, Laverne was next door, and so I had gone to Laverne for a period. And when I was getting home late from a class, and I thought the neighbor had cats, and I thought because our houses are fairly close, that was a cat walking back, but I'm like, it didn't have that graceful stride of a cat. I'm like, what is that? Came, walked through the house, come actually to where I'm literally sitting right now, because this bar, there's an extension on the house, and this bar area where I am is the back corner of the house. This is where they put me. This is the back, corner of the house. But over on this side is where that little alleyway between houses is. And there's a window. So I'm like, what is that? I went and flicked it on. And it was like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of raccoons. Like standing on that thing. I look at it, it looks at me, and I'm like, okay, you're good. Do whatever you want in my yard. I'm gonna walk away, Mr. Raccoon. But and now the raccoons are that stupendous, but it is kind of that like, oh, you get used to like, you don't think you'll see it, so you never look for it. And if you keep looking, that's what I learned from watching the hawks and things, that I've just always learned to like be open to what's around you. Right? Like it's just, I think that, and I think listing probably does that for you, as well, as like be open to it, because the list, you want to add it to your list. But if you just want to experience it, if you keep kind of looking and like realizing that like your neighborhood can always have strange visitors. One of my great triumphs in life was that I started when I was living with my parents, I started feeding the neighborhood birds. And my mom thought this was a very sweet thing, but I didn't even care. I couldn't even tell you. There might have been rare birds that came to that feeder. All I was trying to do was like drive in the hawks that feed on the birds.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it works, by the way. Yeah. If you want Cooper's hawks to come to your yard, put up a sparrow feeder.
That was it. And so finally one morning I see a Cooper's hawk out there. I'm like, oh, there's the Cooper. I've done it. But this is all I wanted in life. And she's like, wait, all you were trying to do was bring hawks to eat the birds? I'm like, yeah, basically. I just wanted to see the hawk. But before we move on to our shots section here, I have to ask. So the last, because I did read it. You keep thinking I'm lying, but I'm going to keep proving otherwise. And then my grade is going up because although I never cared about grades ever until this moment, now I feel very passionate about getting an A today. And it was landscapes with unicorns and barnacles. There's a pretty poignant moment where you talk about whaling and how sometimes they would kill a whale and they'd find fairly ancient, spheres and and things in them. And as a metaphor, I wonder, is there any, at some point in Charles Hood's life, is there any ancient, and I guess this would have to be an autopsy, but is there any ancient spears inside of you that people would dig up sometime?
I was going to hold up my hand. I've got some pencil lead from elementary school. I got stabbed with a pencil, and it's just sitting at that epidermis where it hasn't gone in and it hasn't come back out again. And then I've got some cactus. I went to the San Gabriel mission. This has now been 6 months because they revamped their historical display, showing my companion the cochineal that's there in the mission. And I was waving my hands, and I got my hand right in the cactus. And so I've got cactus that won't emerge out. It won't get absorbed down in. So I'm just full of all these little things. And then we could hold up my leg. Like I've got $70,000 worth of titanium in my right leg from when they tried to put my leg together back after it. So those are the literal wounds. But how about our psychological wounds? We all have those, don't we? Like we're just, if we could just scan an X-ray that just would pick up all the damaged emotions and the emotional dings and tears to our psychological profile. We are all the most beater of beater cars parked and rusting out at the curb. That is who we are as human beings.
Awesome. So I think it is time then. So to do some shots here.
Okay.
So rapid fire question, but before you answer every one of them, you need to down the Jack and Coke, and then we'll just keep making them to get more honest, and as we go. So first question: bird or mammal you most want to see in the wild but haven't?
Yeah, the narwhals would be up there, don't you think? I mean, they're really kind of.
So.
But I went to Mongolia to see a snow leopard, and there was a 75% chance of seeing it, and I'm on the 25% chance of that. And I had to fly through Moscow to get to Mongolia, and they Aeroflot made me miss my flight because they were so incompetent. And I almost got trapped in Moscow, and then I finally get to Mongolia, and then I do all this stuff, and I don't see my snow leopard. Like there's a lot of unfairness here. And Aeroflot lost my bag, so I'm going a week in the same underwear with no backpack or anything. I'm like, but after all of this, I don't see the snow leopard. But I can't decide, do I want to then go back and see the snow leopard, because it's $5,000. Right? There's no $2,000 in airfare, $3,000 for your ground costs. If I go back, what if I miss it again? I'd just be despondent, right? So maybe I should just forget about the snow leopard and move on to something else. So yeah, that's and then the thing that everybody wants to see that nobody can see is the okapi. Do you know that animal from the Congo that you see him in zoos?
It's kind
brown
of a
deer. It's related to the giraffes. It's brown and it's big. It's like a giraffe with a short neck and black zebra stripes on the white and black streaks on the ass. And they are in the war zone of the Congo. Nobody has seen one. I mean the top guys of all would like to see an okapi, and literally you might see one, but you won't make it back out alive. I mean, it's so there's right. They killed the Belgian ambassador. They were so like even the top ambassadors can't get a bulletproof car with enough security to get through on this one road. So that's one. I don't even think about that one because forget it. Like I'll take risk, but there's a definite kind of limit. All right.
All right. Worst question you've ever been asked in an interview, and what should I have asked instead?
Well, I've done hundreds of talks, and I was at one with Boy Scouts for whatever reason. I was being a good community engagement guy, and I'm doing the whole thing about California chaparral and the native birds and native plants. The question is, if a ostrich and a kangaroo got in a fight, who would win? Like, okay, whatever. I'm glad I really came here with all my deep knowledge of California ecosystem so I can answer that question. Right. Yeah. And the answer is an ostrich, because it's got, it's 6 feet tall, it's taller, and it's got razor, the claws, like how the cassowary is the most, vicious bird kind of idea. So I'm going to go ostrich on that one. But yeah. People sometimes are interested in the writing process or the publication process, but that's kind of technical, or really nothing your general audience really needs to know about. Writing is as hard as you think it is. Like it really does. I write sometimes 100 drafts of something, and someone say, how many books have you written? Well, I've published 20. I've probably written 50 books, right? There's lots of times where the book didn't work out, or the publisher went bankrupt, or something happens. I'm owed royalties from I think 3 different of my 20 books that I'll never, that money it's gone. It wasn't a lot of money, $100 or whatever, but yeah. Right. So that's a question that comes up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So best paper you ever received on Robert Hass, and why was it mine?
So for your audience out there in listener land, Robert Hass teaches at UC Berkeley, still does actually, professor emeritus or whatever his status is. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning poet, National Poet Laureate, National Book Award winner. He's the guy. He's the guy. I have a Robert Hass story for you that'll follow this one. I guess. Very good. I don't know how much I should put on air about this, but you weren't the guy who called him, right? Someone else called him. So
no, I didn't call him.
So Robert Hass is a contemporary American poet. He really got a substantial body of work. Gotten all the prizes. He's the pinnacle of poetry. He's Taylor Swift of poetry, or whatever you want to say right now. Beyonce or whatever. Beyonce and Taylor Swift in a love relationship. their love child. So he's the guy. And I used to teach his work, and so one of the students called Hass at Berkeley on his office line, on the phone, and said, Professor Hass, what does your poetry mean? Because I'm writing a paper about you. And Professor Hass says, whatever your professor says it means is what it means. Thank you. Good afternoon. Okay. Great answer. And chutzpah for calling him up. So that's the winner on that one. Absolutely.
Oh
Yeah.
man, that person beat me. I think I wrote a paper with we did a couple essays. This is early on. And he went, okay, you know how to write essays. Just be fun with it. Take the topic
Yeah.
and be fun with it. So when the Robert Hass paper came up, I wrote a poem that was me smoking weed with him. So it was smoking. I forget. It's been a long time. Smoking weed with Robert Hass, and it was like puff puff pass. And at that time, you said it was the best paper you had, and I assume until that moment, it still was.
Right.
You don't realize this whole show exists to self-aggrandize. And
Yeah, well, why does any show exist, right? It's all about you. It's never about your interviewee. So I have a Robert Hass story to self-aggrandize.
Very good.
So I finally got to do a reading with him. You know, we were on the same. We were up in Oakland. We were on the same billing, and I overheard him. Number one, he bought my book. I would have given him a copy of my book, but he actually went to the cash register and bought it. So that's pretty cool, right? Like I made such someone who has thousands and thousands and thousands of books coming into his life that he bought one. But I was with a second person on that particular event, Doug Manuel, a really on fire African American poet, and then me and Robert Hass was a threesome. And I overheard Robert Hass say to himself or to someone else that he knew at the bookstore, it's such a relief to be with real poets, because he has to do all these events that are with posers or like, oh my gosh, like can I quote? Where's my phone? You know, that's why I should have a phone like around me. I could have. If only I gotten that on tape. You know, I could have that as a blurb for the rest of my life. And then we did a Q&A, and then Martin Margolis, who was the founder of Heyday, was in the audience, and he said, if there was a poetry museum, what would it have in it? And Hass turned to me and he says, I think you could probably answer that. And I did have an answer, because I was, like when I do PowerPoints, I can use line break. I can put one poetry, if a poetry is got line breaks in free verse, a little gap between the meaning of one line and the second line, I can show that in a PowerPoint by just not putting the rest of the lines on until I click the advance, right? So one line, two line, three lines, and then that's the stanza, and then the fourth line is the next stanza. And so I said, well, I think a poetry museum should have that kind of idea where the language is visual, but on a delay. So we only get part of the poem at a time. And that satisfied everybody. So I have the poetry museum answer when Hass deflected that one. And maybe he just thought I'd make an ass of myself. He's going to have a little like, oh, watch him bungle that one. But I think I did all right.
I think you did really well. What's a writing rule that should be abolished?
A writing rule that should not be abolished is cliches are still a problem. I think it's a surprising tolerance of cliches that isn't going away. But the writing, you know what it is? It's actually Allen Ginsberg. I don't think he really meant it when he said first thought, best thought. I think he was maybe high. I don't know why he would say that, because first thought is sometimes a good thought and usually not. Right. So that's like first date, best date. Sometimes you get to know someone on the third date. It's going to be a better romance over the course of a marriage. So yeah, that's a precept for the beats, the spontaneity, the privileging of the romantic self. That I'm going to say, no, be a better self than your first. Be a revised. Your revised self is always more interesting than your. If we could re-edit this whole thing, just think how smart you would look and I would look too. Right. We're just going to come back and splice
I do that. In fact, when you watch this, you're going to realize how articulate I am and everything. Like, how did he do that? It's because I'm going to spend 2 hours after just watching, and fixing it. I'm not going to fix you, just me.
Yeah, right, of course. Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Very last question. Biggest risk you ever took?
I've done a lot of physical stuff. I can't swim. I have a phobia of swimming, and we won't get into it tonight, but I drowned as a child and was resuscitated. I can't, every time I try to learn to swim, I'm off the charts with my anxiety. It doesn't work. But I have gone into the ocean a lot because that's where interesting things are. So I ended up being kayaking at night in the South Pacific alone and lost. And it's like you mentioned riding your bike and you didn't have your light because you had to come home late for work. So I didn't plan to be out at night in the ocean in the South Pacific where no one knew. I was on a trip alone. No one knew where I was. So I've taken a risk like that. But actually a bigger risk is I was sexually abused as a child, never told anyone. I told my parents and they told me they told me it didn't happen. And then they told me if it did happen, it was my fault. And I never even brought it up to spouses or therapy or anything, but I've been writing about that incident and some others in some unpublished essays. And it's very hard to not only, everybody's been molested. It's such a tiresome trope, and all the women have got to get a job. They've all been, harmed by their male employers and that kind of thing. So I don't want to be that person. Oh yeah, poor pitiful me, and it's come and gone. And I've already forgiven the person who did it, who not out was being abused himself, another boy, but not being abused by his father or something kind of there. But what's kind of interesting is confronting my tangled emotions, because how dare my parents tell me it didn't happen when it happened? I mean, that blame, and then to blame the victim, like, what the fuck was wrong with you? I know it was the 60s, but come on now. It wasn't the 1860s, you fuckers. But at the same time, like, they were coming out of whatever turmoil they were coming out of. And,
Sure.
Maybe they didn't want to admit to themselves their child had been harmed, because as a parent, that's such a scary thing.
Right.
And so it's very difficult to write well about that kind of topic when men in our culture are generally told, suck it up, a real man doesn't cry. I literally was told by my mother, boys don't cry, that kind of stuff. And certainly I watch Clint Eastwood movies to learn my code of masculinity, which I've internalized quite well. So I can say, yeah, I've been out hiking at night, and it was pretty potentially quite lethal, and I had a gun held to my head in Ethiopia, and all these things that have happened, and I broke my leg alone in a storm, and I thought I could die that way. But really, it's the emotional vulnerability of saying, I was molested, I have processed it, here's what I got out of it, and here's my comments about the 1960s. So what I do with that material, I don't know. I thought I had a book I was going to put it in, and I'm now thinking, having written it, I don't actually need to publish it. It doesn't have the urgency anymore now that I've finally processed it or dealt with it or whatever. Right. So that's the answer. Yeah.
No, thank you for that. It's almost I think about that a lot, is that my the writing is my therapist, half the time. So there's whatever goes, when I was a kid, Elseworlds it's that's how you come to grips with it. And half the time I ended up feeling better after just kind of having addressed it. I tend to address it with fiction because it gives me a little bit of distance to break away from the me, to actually look at myself. But yeah, no, I hear you completely. Thanks for that. So before I let you go, I do, legally and ethically need to have some kind of writing talk, on the show, because the title is Writers Drinking Whiskey. Right. So I did what I thought would be a fun question for you, though, was with, since you won if I have the title, it was for Mouth. It was the, experimental, fiction prize. How do you balance, experimenting, challenging form, language, content, story form, whatever you want to say, with whatever you're experimenting with still making it, relatable, right? So how do you experiment but still connect?
The modernists, so that's capital M modernism, starting with Gertrude Stein especially, were very experimental, playful, break all the rules, to break the pentameter. That was the first heave, says Ezra Pound. So we have 100 years of being avant-garde is also to be experimental, which is a burden. Like, can't I just write a story the regular way? Like, if I'm not being experimental, then I'm not being an artist or something kind of idea. So there's this tension between playfulness and creativity, which can become almost self-indulgence. So James Joyce's final book, Finnegan's Wake, is pretty self-indulgent. I've read it, but I don't actually ask anyone else to read it. It's just other than I like it, the opens with a half a sentence, and the first half of that half a sentence is the last line of the book. So I like to have that circles around. So Mouth is told in two narratives, and it's two women who are in love, and so I'm a heterosexual male writing a lesbian story. That's so problematic for lots of reasons. So I had to be sure I showed the text to people from that culture to say, I'm not being skeezy, right? I've treated this legitimately with respect. But it's two stories. The two women have, one narrative's on the top of the page, one narrative is on the bottom of the page, and their narratives don't coincide, as nobody's, a husband and a wife, or a wife and a wife, or a husband and a husband. They're all going to have different versions of how we met or what happened on the night of our fight. And they're art curators who leave their cushy jobs in London to go to Russia to poach mammoth ivory out of the permafrost, get mammoth ivory, and then have an encounter with the terrorism on the way back, and all these things happen. So there's a lot of plot in there. So it's like a James Bond story almost. It's very plotty, but told with poetic compression. And how I kept it relatable, I hope, is that the actual moments are very human. There's a fear of sexual assault. There's when you're fighting with somebody, when they underestimate you, one partner is doing something the other one doesn't really appreciate. There's hope and longing. So even though the form was experimental, and then it's almost like a graphic novel, there were these images every few pages of a person, and that person I'll explain it in just a minute. But the person's expression matches the text. And so what happened was, the reason there's a book called Mouth is that there's a fabulous artist named Christine Magnolo, and she had had jaw surgery one summer where her whole mouth had to be fixed for medical reasons, and she was wired shut, and then she couldn't eat and drink through a straw for months and months, and it changed the look at her. And so as she healed, she drew self-portraits in pastel of her face, and she would grimace and try to show her wired up mouth and so on, and always different kind of exaggerated, very, very honest portraits. And with her permission, I said, I hear a narrative coming out of those faces, like that. Those faces are telling me something. So with her permission, I then created these two characters, one of whom is the face we see every few pages. So it's experimental in how language and image work and how the top and the bottom of the page work, but it's actually very conventional in that it's a love story, it's an adventure story, it's something about ecology, it's something about magical realism, it's something about the brutality of a police state because the police come and are going to sexually assault the women and blah, 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 blah. So I guess the answer is giving the reader something they can hang on to, but also giving them some playfulness or some, here's what the genre was, how can we push it or tear it apart or mix it?
There's a quote, and so, because I even have a post-it, say, grade, raising. I think this essay is divorce insurance, where you had described about how it was the Hindenburg, and one of the last people was actually an acrobat that ended up, being saved. And it was kind of how you don't know how our odd career choices may save our lives later, right? Do you think there's any way that, becoming a professor, becoming a writer saved your life?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've met a lot of interesting people. I've had money for therapy when I needed it. I had money for medication when I needed it. So there were some really dark times that were dark, but there also then were the support mechanisms, friends and career and money, to be honest. I've had a career where I had, I could afford my house. I wasn't financially insecure after a certain point, or not so bad. And so, of course, we make choices that protect ourselves, I hope, good choices. So one of my choices is I have a career that has a pension, so we can have this conversation now, and I don't have to say, oh, I'm on my way to Walmart. I got to get to the greeter station. My pension is letting me have this great conversation with you.
Yeah, very good. Awesome. So if you don't mind, then is there something you'd be open to reading for us today?
So you mentioned there was an essay about whales and whaling, the history of whales and whaling at the end of the book, A Salad Only the Devil Would Eat. And so I'll read the last page of that because it's a good exit line for us. So for the context for our readers at home, our listeners at home, I've described going out on a boat out of Monterey and all the animals that we've seen and the ways in which historically we harvested cetaceans and now we don't anymore, and they're coming back. And so all the animals and dolphins and things we had seen on this, it was a real trip. Wasn't hypothetical. And in fact, my editor maybe cut some of the trip out because it was just going on. So there's too many dolphins. Get us back to port. so I left out the dolls' purposes. It's really great. Right. So this is I'm now reading from the last page of the last essay of the book called A Salad Only the Devil Would Eat, The Joys of Ugly Nature. And I've been out on the ocean on a trip out of Monterey on a whale watching boat. Even so, we go on, each of us, sitting in the late slant sun on the back of a boat, salt-lipped, slit-eyed, gull-lifted. I finally can hear what the water has been trying to tell me all day. And that is that none of us should be in mourning, or at least not for long, but instead we should use the last of the light to write a thank you note to the gods. There are indeed such animals as whales. We did not kill them all. Thank you. And there is a color the Romans knew, glaucus, that's not blue, not gray, not green, but all those at once. And while we may no longer have a word for that hue, it is out there. And the water can be that color. Today I saw it, so thank you. We crossed a wall of bait fish and birds circled the boat like ecstatic confetti. And I don't even know what kind they were, but thank you. Good friends wait for me on land in the simple pleasures of hot baths and warm beds. Thank you. Somewhere inside the cloud chamber that is my camera waits a perfect picture of a dolphin. I wake up tonight and stand at the hotel window. No matter how late it is, I will hear the distant sea lions talking each to each. If I listen just a little bit longer, I might hear a great horned owl. I do believe I deserve to be happy, but it still stuns me to be this happy. If I want to go back out tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and even the day after that, there'll be a boat ready to do that. And if not a boat, then a kayak or just a piece of the shore where I can sit and look and write and think. If the blue whales migrate away, then the gray whales will fill in their places. And when they finally get done with California and go off to Alaska, something else will be here instead. Maybe an orca, maybe a beaked whale, maybe the first right whale in 100 years, maybe some new and marvelous creature never spoken of before in the history of science. I'm sorry if I'm blinking like such a newbie. I never thought I would get this far, to be honest, to be allowed to see and feel so much. Whatever holy stick magicked this day into existence, whatever rod drove us forward and herded the clouds in the sky and beat out such an exact and perfect tempo. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you for that. And thanks for coming on. It's been a great pleasure, having you here. I'm mostly a man that is immune to mentors. Just the whole tenor of it is not something that strikes me. But you are someone that I've always thought really fondly of that helped me along the way. So I purposely waited to reach out until I had at least some kind of momentum with this show, because I was like, you know what, I want to wait to do this until I have hopefully something I can give back. So thanks so much for all your support through the years, and just for you being you, even though, half your students hated you, and maybe it was, well, not hated, but we're unhappy.
That's, if anything, more than half, but you're generous to limit it only to 50%. Yes. And pretty much 90% of the administrators too. Let's not just limit it to those beneath me. Those above me too have their own opinions, but oh well, they all can be whoever they need to be. Anyway, yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Namaste.
Awesome.
Good night.
Yeah. Okay. Good night, sir. Thanks for tuning in. If you have a subject you'd like us to cover or something you'd like us to do a deeper dive into, drop us a comment. We'd love to include it on a future episode. The show is a labor of fun, and it's truly a reward in its own right. But if you would like to support me or the other amazing authors I have on there, consider picking up a book. Any of the writers we have on here would be a great addition to your bookshelf. Each one is a master storyteller and just a great person to boot, so you'd be doing them and yourself a great favor in picking those up. And while I would never call myself a master, because that would be, as we said in the 90s, conceited, I do have on a pretty good authority from critics and my mom alike that I'm not bad. So if you wouldn't mind picking up one of my books, that would be great as well. I would appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and thanks to my great panel of guests for coming on and spending this time with us. Cheers.